My name is Gianfranco Chicco from the Craftsman newsletter. Today we're going to be talking with Cindy Lilen, who's a designer and textile artist from Argentina. And she is one of the two co-creators of the Argentina Pavilion at London Design Biennale. Hello, Cindy. How are
Hi,
you?
very good. It's a pleasure to be here and being able to do it from here with the installation behind me. So yeah, very happy to be here.
We're going to talk a bit about the installation in a moment. Just for the record, there's one of the layers of the installation that we had to turn off for this conversation, which is the audio part. Now, Cindy, I wanted to start with the origin story. So, you are originally from Patagonia in Argentina. I'm very curious to hear more about where exactly you're from, but then how did you become interested in design and textiles?
Small town in the north part of Patagonia. It's a valley. It has like around 10 cities, but outside this valley, that is no more than 60 kilometers long, there is nothing. So it's very desertic area and very isolated as well. So for us, when I was a child, it was very common to just get out of the valley and go and see the emptiness of the landscape. At that time, for me, it was extremely boring, but that definitely shaped the way I see the world. And I had the pleasure of living opposite to my grandma's house. And I think that had a lot of impact on my career, I would say, because there's not much you can do in a town like mine. So you have to come out with ideas all the time. So craft for me was always something that got me entertained, and I was slowly getting passionate about creating things. My grandma used to knit, used to do punch needlework, also like the everyday tasks, look after the plants, cook, like everything was handmade. And the time in a space like this is quite slow if you compare it to places like London, right? So I think these dynamics in my childhood of being like having a lot of time and being like surrounded by nature and visiting my grandma in a daily basic and being able to connect with some materials as well, because wool for us is everywhere. Everyone has a jumper that has been passed on from my grandma, from my mother, from my brother, my friends or family. We were all wearing something handmade from someone in the family. And also, since there is not much to do in terms of like cities, the lifestyle, attending like craft fairs, it was something very common, at least for my family. So I remember that going to see wood carved pieces or woven textiles from small communities. And for me, at that time, it was a bit of a magic thing because I knew the raw material and then I could see the outcome. And for me, it was like, wow, this is super interesting.
So in a way, craft as a kid was intertwined with play, right? So it's you saw it as part of life, but also a way to not pass time in a negative sense, but to go and discover things and make things, and not necessarily today. Craft, there's a very romantic view of it, and often craft, especially in cities like London, it's paired more and more towards art, further away from what is the origin or the essence of craft, which was something that people did themselves or in their community and in their use. So for you, there was this element of play, but also of this is everyday life, right? And we're going to talk about the wool in a moment because it's not just ordinary wool, right? It's very, very special, especially from today's point of view. And that's one of the reasons why we call this session Miracle Fibres. So you're a child going in and out of these spaces of handmade, of family, of community. But what happened next? Because you're still in Patagonia at this point.
Yeah. And when I was there, of course, I didn't realize all the things that I have around me. So when I decided to study, I wanted to study design just because I was all the time in contact with fabrics and yarns from my grandma and the people around me, everyone like, sew clothes or things like that. And at that time, we couldn't study any sort of design in my area. So I decided to go to the capital, to Buenos Aires. And the closest that I found was fashion and textiles. And at that time, I thought fashion was my main interest. but I was wrong. So after 1 year in my studies, I discovered that textiles were more creative in the way that I was perceiving creativity, more like genuine in a way, because fashion is pretty much based on seasons and very fast paced. And so I did my BA, but I was a bit confused about the design world and how to make it work after I finished. So I decided kind of like go into experimenting in other places. So I decided to come to Europe without knowing much, again, what I wanted to do. And then I ended up in London. And then I wanted to research more about textiles in general without really knowing what about. So I got lucky enough to get a scholarship. So I started my master on textile art at Chelsea College of Art. And at that time, it was like a research master. So I remember the first day the tutors asked me, what do you want to research about? And I was like, I don't know what I want to say, but I really knew that I had something to say, but I didn't know the shape at the time. And I think the fact of being far away from home made me connect with my roots again. I noticed that I was super interested in natural materials in general, but I had like a special connection to wool. And then I started like picking up why and which type of wool and how. So I started experimenting. And I think that led me back after probably 6-7 years back to my origins in a way. So that was a bit my journey to London and to get into the textile world properly.
So let's talk about these wools and why some people consider them miracle fibers. Because when we say wool, most people will think sheep, and that is part of the equation, but wool goes way beyond that, especially the wools you work with. So tell us a bit more about those interesting materials and curious animals.
Coming from Patagonia, we have access to some of the finest fibers. I had this memory of touching super soft wool. So when I was researching for my master, I was like, this is not even close to what I'm used to. So that took me back to get in touch with some communities from my area, weavers and some people that live more in this desertic area that I was mentioning before, and they have their sheep in the backyard, and they do the whole process. And the quality of the wool was super special. It was mainly merino wool, but they also work with camelid fibers. Camelid fibers for us in Argentina includes 4 types of camelid. So we have Guanaco, Alpaca, Vicuña, and Llama. And that's another level of fibers. So I realized that the wool in itself had a lot of tradition for our area, right? Like everyone was knowing something about the wool or the type of animal that was coming from. Plus, for most of these communities, weaving with this wool was part of passing on some knowledge, some symbols from the community, some traditions. So I was super hooked to all these topics around the material, because I was, okay, I'm not just talking about the material in itself, I'm talking about all these people and the way they interact with this fiber.
Material is also community and history, and it's very much connected to the territory. It's not just something that you get off a shelf. It has an impact in how people live, how people work, how people possibly dress, and possibly affects also their fashion sense.
That where I'm from in winter it's very cold, so we all have woolen clothes to wear, like hats. So pretty much everyone wears like handmade clothing there. And for some communities, it goes beyond, because they do decoration, they preserve the community activities through weaving. For me, it was like opening a door, because I discovered a lot of stories that I didn't know from my own region. And that was super interesting. And then I started realizing that in many, many places in the world, not just where I'm from, this was a common topic. People gather together, people feel like they belong somewhere through the craft they make. I wanted to learn the craft, but also to understand the situation nowadays. That took me to talk to the wool producers from Patagonia, the small ones, the big ones, and understand a little bit how these fibers move around. So for some people, it's just a matter of like financial or business or economic things, but for most of them, it's more about tradition, it's more about the way they preserve identity and culture. It's very interesting because sometimes you don't need to ask that much, because as soon as you see these people or you interact with their craft, you start understanding things that are unwritten. There is a special connection through the material. And that, for me, was extremely interesting. That's what got me into what I'm doing today, trying to understand the past through the materiality and try to bring it in a contemporary framework.
And one of those frameworks, if you wish, is what you've done at London Design Biennale, where you're the co-creator and you're right now inside the pavilion. So give us a peek into first the process. Why did you decide to join, and then what was the plan? And then maybe we can have a look at actually the stuff that is around you right now.
So based on all what I just said about my journey in discovering the fibers and getting in touch with different people from Patagonia. Patagonia is quite big for people that don't know. So from the north, where I'm from, to the south is over 2,000 kilometers. So it was like a big exploration of the area. And then I met Iliana, who is the sound artist that we create the pavilion together. She's from a little bit farther north in Argentina, but she grew up by the mountainside. So we both have this deep research about the cosmovision of these communities that live by the Andes. I know cosmovision is not a very usual word.
That is a beautiful word.
It's a beautiful word. I love it so much because it says so many things. But when it comes the time that I have to explain, I can never say it like 100% right, because it involves so many things. It's an Andean concept, I would say, but it also works in, of course, different communities. Cosmovision is the way that these people see the world around them. It talks about connection with environment, connection with nature, connection with the natural cycles, the constellations, understanding the seasons, the winds, the sun, the stars. It's such a holistic concept that it's impossible to put it into words properly.
And one thing to clarify, you're talking about the Andes, which is the massive mountain range that crisscrosses from north to south Argentina. I just wanted to give a reference of size, because you were talking about how big Patagonia is. When you look at a map, not only the maps we're used to, they've been forced into a certain shape to make it flat and make sense. But when I lived in Italy, I used to tell friends, people in general, that just the province of Buenos Aires, which is not part of Patagonia, but is the capital city and province of Argentina, is bigger in surface than the whole of Italy. Now, Italy is thin and long. Buenos Aires is kind of chunky and roundish. When we think that Italy is very big, and then you think that just one province, which is not the biggest in Argentina, is bigger than the whole of Italy, then that puts things into perspective. And for us, definitely when I was a kid, low cost airlines were not a thing and flying was quite expensive. So it was very common for holidays or travel in general to drive for 5 or 6 hours to go to the beach, or for almost 24, in my case, 22, when I was based in Buenos Aires, to go to Patagonia, to Puerto Madryn. And that was normal, right? 22 hours just to be a different place within your country. Well, in Europe, if you travel by plane or train for more than 2 hours or 3 hours, you're in a different country completely.
For me, when I moved to Europe, I used to say, oh, it's very close. What does close mean? 5 hours, because it was the closest thing we could reach if we left this valley that I was talking at the beginning. So it was a challenge. We wanted to give a go to represent Argentina in the London Design Biennale, but we wanted to have something that could include most of the country in a way. And that's very challenging because, again, Argentina is very big and there are like different influences. But we both have been researching about this cosmovision. So we decided that the Andes were a good place to start because they go from the north to the south of the country, and they host like most of the native communities from Argentina. We wanted to really focus on this because of many things. First of all, because me being a textile artist, I believe that textile hold a lot of knowledge about the past. In Argentina, what happened before the colonization is a bit neglected. So we don't have that much information about it. We don't know exactly what happened when we go to school. We barely touch those topics. So we wanted to put the spotlight again on these traditions that shape the culture that we have in the country. And they are very important for us. And we got so attached to nature and to like the natural way of being of the human body that we thought it would be really nice to use a poetic way to reconnect this past with what is going on today. When we started, the idea was like, you know, when you reach the peak of the mountain and you feel like, oh, that was tough, but wow, I'm glad I did it. And you feel calm and you start getting amazed by the view and the sky. And I don't know, but the Andes in general and Argentina has a beautiful sky. So we were like, we want to offer something like that. We don't want to go very politic or, you know, extreme. We want to make the craft that will provide people a space in central London where they can feel like relaxed and where they can connect with themselves and connect with the materiality that we are proposing here. So mixing a bit traditional textile techniques, some sounds based on native chants and natural sounds, and providing also the light. We worked quite hard to get like the warmth that we wanted, because we wanted to also reflect, you know, the sunlight in the morning or the sunset feeling. We wanted to create a space where you can say like the same feeling when you are observing a sunset, you're like, oh, this is nice. And you just stop for, even if it's for 2 seconds of your life, and you're like, oh, that's nice. So we wanted to do that through the craft and the sound.
Oh, that's fabulous. We're recording this live session on the 20th of June, which is the solstice. And it used to be very important for people to connect with nature, especially in definitely the Nordic countries of Europe, you know, where people will go out and celebrate and spend time outside and enjoy the light and honoring nature. But in cities like London or Milan or other great capitals, it feels very detached, right? Nature seems almost like an accessory you look for when maybe you're visiting or you're just saying where to live. Nature has become secondary in a way. And in particular, many of the fibers you're working with today are seen as, you know, amazing, super performative, luxurious, but this is how people lived. And they're not just random fibers. They're fibers that were very much attuned to life, to nature, to the benefits. You mentioned that it's very cold. So the kind of wools you work with and stuff bring warmth, keep humidity, and so many aspects that now we're almost, at least for most of us, if we're lucky, rediscovering when we go to a pavilion like yours, which makes us wonder, what is this? Why is this special? And what is this thing I'm feeling? We have this beautiful view of something behind you with all the shapes and light. So give us a little bit of an explainer of what are we looking at?
Yeah, so what you are seeing is the main piece from the pavilion. It's at the back. This is a big loom with an open end. I used the raw fibers. This wool is Merino wool and Vicuña, the one in the center. It's raw. It's been only washed and brushed because I wanted to really bring the fiber as natural as possible. It's a big loom, as I said, with an open end, because I believe textiles are a way of writing stories and preserving knowledge. So the open end means that it's a story that keeps going, that can continue, that is open to be written in the future from the next generations. Within the piece, there are some symbols from the Andean communities, like the chacana. The chacana is a sort of cross that is considered a very magical shape. It connects the underworld, but it's also used to plan the harvesting or the different seasons. Most of Peru, for example, was designed following the structure of the chacana plus the relationship with the constellation. So it's a very powerful symbol for Indian communities.
Which one is it?
So if
Point at it.
the knotting that goes at the top, so this is the top part of the chacana. The chacana is like this. I don't know if you see me, but it's like a sort of stairs shape. So it's half of it. So it's the top part here. The bottom part is on the bench that I'm sitting off. I can show you later. So the chacana frame is a way of bringing this to a sacred state, right? Offering this connection. The central part, which is just behind me, this here is felt, and as I said, Vicuña wool is very special. So the Vicuña is very similar to the llama. The main difference is that the Vicuña is wild and the llama is domestic, so it's a bit more challenging to get the fiber, but it's also a very interesting way of getting it. So it's a tradition in certain communities. You need like a lot of people to make it happen.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful process. So the idea of the central part was to offer a sort of portal where you can connect with something beyond the installation. So that's why it's a felted piece. It has the texture that you can see better thanks to the light that is behind. And then you might see that there are like some zigzag going on. These communities have some animals that are very important, like the puma, the condor, and the snake is one of them. The snake is very clever, and it guides them to find the way and protects them. So it's very, very important. I decided that I wanted to bring the snake in. So yeah, this probably the back piece has the most powerful symbols from the Andean community. And then I'm sitting on a bench that has some lights on it. I can show you in a second. It's also hand felt. And the idea of this bench is to represent the weaver's bench, because I believe that when a weaver sits down to start a craft, it connects with the material, with the community, with the craft, and it bonds the community as well, because they teach the craft to each other. And I don't know if there are makers here, but when you make something, there is a triangulation between your brain, your hands, and your heart. So I wanted to bring that space here on the bench. So when people come and visit, they can feel that. They can touch the fibers because it's covered in felt. It has light, so it attracts the warmth of it. And you are positioned in front of the main piece. So if you allow yourself, you can actually get in a sort of bubble. Now the sound is not on, but the sound is also helping. The sound has been created with some special frequencies that help you to be calm, and also like some natural sounds, like you can perceive the wind or the birds from this area. And then there's another piece at the back that is made with merino and llama, and this represents the guardians. So most of the Andean communities, they believe there are some guardians living up in the mountains. Most of them call them apus, and these guardians, they protect them. So they don't call them gods, they call them guardians, and I think that's beautiful. To believe that there is always something looking after you.
You touch on so many important things, and so many cultures have this concept of the guardians. In Japan, they call them the kami, which we translate as gods, but it's not exactly God like in the Judeo-Christian beliefs. But I wanted to go back to something you mentioned, which I think is so important about craft and that you bring through your design and art, which is the connection. Often, especially in Western societies, we see craft as beautiful or utilitarian, but something we go and purchase from someone else. But the value of craft, the object is just one of the touch points, right? It's the knowledge that's codified in it, the connection you get between body, mind, and spirit while you're making, how it brings community together. And those are often the values that we overlook, but should be the ones that we put front and center. Because then, of course, the result sometimes is beautiful, useful, needed, desired object, but that's only the end of it. And even if you think of one of the easiest crafts for people to get into, which is cooking for themselves, for the loved ones, the value of cooking is not in the final dish, it's in the care that goes for the materials that you use into the cooking, for sharing with others, gathering with others. And when we see only the transactional part in the end, going out to eat or going to a maker and buying from them, that's only the tip of the iceberg, and often is not where all the values. Of course, it's great to have, in the case of textiles, a beautiful garment or installation because it offers practical value. But that connection between people, between history, between culture, between the materials. Materials come up in a certain place because they're valuable for that place. So I'm curious how these guides the work you do. I've seen your work also in Milan during the Salone. Tell me about how these things influence your thinking, your artistry, or your design.
I'm a bit utopic, I have to say, for a designer for this time. I've been 10 years living in London now, and I think I have a mixed personality right now because I have this fast-paced city mind that is like, yeah, let's go fast, keep going, do things, thousands of things at a time. And suddenly I go back to my town to visit my family, and it's like, everything can wait. Everyone is happy. We can have a meal for 3 hours and we can just sit down and drink mate or something. So the time changes. Yeah, of time is different. And I believe for modern societies, we need middle point, you know. London is too crazy and probably my town is too slow. There is no right or wrong. But for me, I think balance is important. And I think, you know, we are, I'm talking from my own experience anyways, but we all get like frustrated and get into some cycles that we don't understand what is going on. And for me, when I started my research for my master, when I connect with natural materials, I noticed that something was changing within myself. I was like, oh, when I'm making, I'm like in contact with these fibers, I slow down, you know, and I also use lighting all the time in my projects. Having warm light and something soft and something that I could touch, that had an impact on me. So that was part of what I wanted to say. I thought, okay, if I can bring a small piece or something that will make people think and reflect. In Nordic cultures, this is very common to have because it's too cold, days are short. So when they got back home, they want to have like really nice objects and soft light and warmth so they can feel like, okay, I'm in a cozy place. So that's what I'm trying to do through my work, to offer those small spaces of peace or connection or something like that. Something that changed what I wanted to say was at the very beginning when I was just starting my master, I went back home and I was talking about what I wanted to do. And my dad said to me, there's a community of weavers that live 200 kilometers from here. We should go. And I was like, do you think we should? Yeah, let's go. Tomorrow we go. So we called somebody, we went there. And that was magical because it's a town with, no joking, 6 houses. And all these 6 women received me, opened their doors. They showed me how they have the sheep, how they create together, how they gather together. And I was like, wow, this is beautiful. And we all should be aware that these sort of dynamics also exist. It doesn't matter if you are in London, in Milan, New York. We need to understand that it's more beyond the fast pace of nowadays. So that's part of the concepts that I use behind my work.
But when we were chatting in the last few days, you also mentioned that there's challenges with working with these fibers and these communities, not just the fact that you have to sometimes chase the Vicuña down the mountain. Because in part, yes, they're from a European perspective, they're very far away, so they're remote. But even there, you just mentioned that you did 200 kilometers, which in Argentinian terms is close by. But to go and find this 6 houses with this women that weave. So can you talk a bit about the challenges of working with these natural fibers and in particular the ones from the Andes?
It's very challenging because so I met these women. They are part of our cooperative that reunites a lot of weavers. But again, they live like 200 kilometers, 400 kilometers from each other. So the logistics are super hard. To go there, we have to go to another town, pick up a person that knew how to get there. We have to have like a proper car to go through all these like super extreme roads. So it's very hard. And it's also So Argentina has one of the finest fibers, right? And we have a lot of production as well. The problem is the circumstances. It's a huge country. It's not very well connected. As you said, there is no low-cost flights. You have to drive a lot. The nearest airport is 2 hours from where you are, or 3 or 4. It requires a lot of logistics. And of course, doing it by yourself or like these cooperatives that I met is very hard because you can just only keep going, but you don't really make a huge impact. So I had a chance to talk to many people that produce the wool, or even the Guanaco is the same logistic as the Vicuña. You need to run behind them to get the fibers pretty much.
Yeah, and the Guanaco spits back.
Yeah, exactly. Even worse. The problem is that at the moment it's a bit of lack of support, and it's a true shame because, first of all, there are some traditions like the way of getting the wool from the Guanaco of the Vicuña that is very ancestral and very important legacy, I would say. It's getting lost because people are losing the hope to actually live out of that.
Can you explain a bit more how people get the fibers from these animals?
It's not only that it's a hard fiber to get, they are extremely clever animals. So the Guanaco, for example, will remember where you catch them the last year, so they won't go back there. So basically, they wild, they free in the mountains, and they fast, they run fast. So the way to get the fibers is you need a lot of people to build a sort of structure that is, it has the shape of a tunnel, let's say. So they get confused, they enter in this tunnel, and then you have, I think, because they are also protected, depending in what part of Argentina you are, you have access for more or less time with the animals. So it's around an hour and a half that you have them, sometimes even less, like 30 minutes. So you need to manage to get the animal getting into this tunnel, get the wool from there in 30 minutes, and then release the animal. And you have to do it in one day because they, as I said, they are super smart. So if it takes longer, they just gonna run away. To create this structure and to make sure the animals go to the right way and they are like treated in the right way, that's a lot of things that are part of traditions, are part of different ways of interacting within the community. Companies try to come and do it in a different way, but it's nature. It's not so easy, to preserve the animals, to obtain the right quality of the fiber. So it's challenging. It's challenging because it's a moment where the new market needs to embrace the past and the traditional way of doing things. And that's a conversation that is not really happening at the moment in the area. And that's the most challenging part, because on one side you have the small communities, but they are quite small. So for them to reach bigger productions or be able to do more with the fibers, they need more support. And the distances and the lack of infrastructure, it's a problem. So it's quite challenging.
And also, I think there's a lot of asymmetry in the market because a few of the companies that work with these fibers see them as very luxurious, make very expensive products. But often what happens is that they're unwilling to invest in the region of the people. They have definitely more resources, and sometimes it can be extractive in a way. They embrace the product, not the culture, or they don't want to support that. And the culture, of course, sometimes needs to collaborate with these organizations to give it a market. As you mentioned, the logistics are challenging. Import export is not necessarily easy in Argentina, so that adds another layer. Let's go back for a moment to the story. Ray wrote a question and she says, "Hello, Cindy. It's so wonderful to meet you here and feel the warmth you've brought to the space and gives us a sense of where you come from. Can you share with us something your grandmother used to tell you and you always remember, or a story of her? Thank you."
I think we have connection with little things. As I said, I was creating absolutely everything with her, cooking, looking after the plants, the dogs, knitting, sewing. She had a very old sewing machine, and I was grabbing pieces of fabric from everywhere. I was cutting my trousers, make something else. My mom was like, "How can you dress like that?" Because I was making my own clothes. But something that for me has a deep connection with her is like she had like a jasmine plant right by her main door. And jasmines are a hard plant to look after because
Big Jasmine, the small or the
it
small?
was no, it was a big one, and the plant was actually quite huge. And it's very rare to find one in that area. They are more common in other areas in Argentina. So we always have this exchange of, she was teaching me something, I was helping her, and when I left, because she knew I love this jasmine so much, she was drying the flowers and
That's
saved them for me to make a tea. She was also sewing like little bags where she was putting the jasmines inside. And I think that remains always with me as a memory because that's pretty much the sensation that I have towards materials. There are like some little things that connect you with a person, with a memory, with a moment. And I think that's super rich to have it in life.
so powerful, right? Because very often, especially in a digitally obsessed world, there's a visual side and maybe the sound, and everything goes through there. And we neglect our other senses. And you could argue that actually we have more than five senses, but five is an easy way to describe them. And smell, perfume is one of the most powerful. We react to it in ways that we don't even realize consciously. And is one of the most neglected. Even if you think of how we wash our clothes and we put those very strong artificial smells into it that cover everything else. A beautiful textile, a beautiful wool will have a natural smell to it that then interacts with your own body or if you use any fragrance. And that is so powerful. And again, it's one of the other layers that craft always gave it for granted. And only now modern society is rediscovering that we are all these things, right? We're not just our minds, we're our body. We feel and understand the world through our senses. And smell, taste, touch are so valuable. You were mentioning earlier the feeling you had with those textiles, which now we associate with premium luxury, right? Because we're so used to using cheap textiles that are very dull to the touch. And then you interact with these materials, and it almost feels like your senses explode. All this resolution is like living your life in low res and then rediscovering that actually the original way of living was always in high resolution. And these textiles are a big part of it, from touch, from smell, from how they look. I like that you kept the fibers raw in their color because even that, we almost forget what is natural. You go to the supermarket, vegetables have been painted because we don't want to buy oranges that are not strong orange, even though in nature there are a variety of yellows and greens, and those are the best ones.
100%. So all the fibers here are natural colors. And I think we all understand that sheep are pretty much white. I had so many people asking me, is this the raw material? This is the real color. I was very surprised. So, okay, I grew up in an area full of sheep. That makes me understand the detachment that we have. We have a visitor the other day that sat down on this bench. And as I said, you can touch it while you're sitting. And suddenly, of course, helped by the sound, she got emotional. And that made me super happy as the maker. But at the same time, made me ask how long do we spend without stopping and thinking and embracing what the body needs?
And feeling.
Because even if I go to buy some clothes, me myself, I get super bored because I hate to touch bad fabric. That makes me anxious. I don't know, I hate it. Most people don't have that opportunity to access to touch a sheep, to engage with trees, to I mean, we do have the access, but sometimes we forget that it's something that we should be doing to
Yeah.
reconnect what is out there.
Or we considered it secondary, especially today, where there's a big push in society through a technology layer. Doesn't matter if it's AI or whatever is the latest trend there. It almost neglects the value of all these other things that we start seeing as luxury. Well, they're not luxury. They were part of life. If you go to some of the humblest and most remote places around the world, they never lost that. And you mentioned this earlier that leaving your town allowed you to revalue a lot of the things you have there. Because sometimes when you are inside It's this famous saying of a fish asking, what is water? Because they are in the water, so they cannot notice it. But what I find so crazy is that things that were there, that are connection with communities and territory and where how we lived now have become so rare because we live in this extraneous worlds that we created over centuries. This didn't happen, of course, overnight. But when we do reconnect with them, we have that feeling of calm or wellness or something that we struggle to put into words, which was the primordial way of being. We've been talking a lot about what you've done here in London. And by the way, the Biennale is still running until the end of June, until 29th, so people can visit. But you've worked in other places, you've exhibited in other places. Here we can get a glimpse that you're working with light, but I've seen your objects where you mix the fibers and light. So tell me a bit more about what you would like to do next or other projects you might have on the way. Give us a glimpse beyond the robe.
I really care about how creating nice environments for everyday life. So I've been creating, I call it sculptural lighting and fibers. I've been always researching about the power of mixing fibers with LEDs. So I create small pieces, lamps for decoration, for interiors, also for some hospitality projects. I do a wide range of things within the textiles. I research a lot as well about the craft and these communities and why these fibers and what do they mean. I've been exhibiting in Milan. It's more like product focus. But then I'm going to be doing some residencies at the end of the year. One of them is going to be in Sao Paulo. It's pretty much related to about these traditions with the South American cultures and how to translate it into something modern. And that's a little bit all the things that I cover within the textiles. My idea is to, well, I'm working on launching some new products probably in few months with lighting and fibers, of course. So what I do is a bit of a critic situation because I'm within craft design and art. So it's great, but sometimes, it's also about making the viewer understanding like what is behind. I love to create spaces. I think that's the main part of my work these days, to create these tiny environments where people can slightly change their perception. So yeah, that's a bit like the products, the installation. I also do some lectures sometimes about, traditional textile techniques and the residency.
Well, there's lots of exciting stuff in the pipeline. So finally, I would like to talk a bit about, you shared your work at the Biennale, outside of the Biennale, but when you approach research and especially maybe things you found about these materials that have surprised you, because as I said, the moniker Miracle Fibers is, if you think of performance textiles, a lot of them use merino, and merino has been all the rage, at least for the last decade or so. Some countries like Australia, they export a lot of merino that gets turned into high performance textiles, which 20 years ago, high performance was only about synthetics. So when you've got into your research, what surprised you or what are the things that you'd like to explore further?
I think I will never reach the answer. It's all the unwritten symbols that you can find on textiles. The Andes, we mainly know woven pieces, but there are so many textile techniques, knotting, dyeing, so many things, and everything has a meaning behind it. It blows up my mind. I remember when I went through the quipus. So quipus is a knotted language, mainly from Peru, but it's like from the Andean communities as well. They belong to the Inca Empire. They were writing poems through knots. I mean, we nowadays are incapable of expressing many things without using the language, right? The written language. So for me to discover the intelligence of these people understanding the world through the senses, very haptic, colors have like very powerful meanings. That was probably some of the most interesting things that I came across. And I think it's such a shame that we got so detached for such a long time that now is nearly impossible to recover all that understanding, you know? So that's why also my work has a modern approach, because I respect what happened in the past. I don't pretend to replicate because I think that belongs to those generations. I just try to understand through a meaningful and contemporary way, to also being able to be like the person in the middle, to translate those ancestral things into a modern concept that people these days can understand. Because if we keep talking for the past, then there is, you know, a black hole of misunderstanding, of no getting the real concepts behind it. So.
Life has changed. Sometimes we see a lot of romanticism in the narrative of craft, which can be beautiful, but sometimes it obviates why some of these things came through. And you were mentioning textiles as language, or earlier there's the fast-paced, crazy city, and then the very slow-paced town. But we live somewhere in the middle, right? And I think what your work can be is a bridge between these two things in a moment where we need it a lot, right? So even written language was a great advancement in humanity and how we connect and communicate and how we think. But we almost took the new tech writing and threw everything else away. And now we're discovering that the other bit was also very important to what we are, who we are, and our relationship with Earth. That is not a material source, it's our home. And we're just a little element of it, not at the top of the chain. I want to leave for the end of the conversation the risky bit. If you can show us a bit around with your phone, and we always know that the connectivity might collapse, but so that's why I didn't want to do it in the middle. You have one piece hanging in front of you, which is this sort of cloak of the Apu. You mentioned that word, the Guardians in the Andes. Shall we try to get a glimpse of
We
it?
here is this piece that is the
Beautiful.
apple. And so the white part at the back is llama. So I'll show you here. This part here is llama, and it's been woven by artisans from the Andes. Llama is a very special fiber. We don't have a visual representation of this apple. So this is my very own representation, but because I was talking about the weavers, I decided that I wanted to make it quite female shape as well. So this is the protector of the room, and I'm gonna just go the other way and move a little bit. So that's the main piece, and that's the bench where I was sitting on. That if I'm gonna go closer, I'll show you. So this here, this woven part is the chacana shape, the bottom part, like this. And that's the top part on the nuts. I don't know if you can see it, maybe. I mean, if you're in London, you're welcome to visit. And here is a bit of the details. Lighting is not so great on the phone, but yeah.
It's definitely amazing in person. The phone just offers a glimpse of the beauty through, again, ironically, only one of the senses, which is the visual one. But when you are in the space, you can see the textiles, feel the textiles, hear the sounds, and a lot of what is transmitted is beyond just words or your brain, right? It's that essence of the space you created there. Well, Cindy, this was brilliant. I think we should celebrate more these communities and materials and ways of working, not just to reconnect with the past, which I think is very important, but also because it could be a path into the future and memory and who we are, what we're part of, but also the value that these materials have. On one side, they could be great for the economy in Argentina if we learn to value them more and deal with the challenges that they offer. But also as a culture, it goes beyond the narrative we have of who we are, where we come from, what is valuable today, what is worth preserving, and what they bring into modern life. So, with that, I'd like to thank you very much. As we said, the Biennale is going on until the end of June 2025. If you're watching this live or the recording, Thank you very much. Any parting words for our audience?
I'm very pleased to be here. I love to talk about these topics, and I think it connects people anyways, anytime we talk about these things. I'll be here until the 29th, and I'm more than happy to welcome anybody and explain further the installation. So thank you for these moments, and yeah, for having the opportunity to talk about craft in general.